that's really been my approach as a leader. I think to be good at partnerships, you have to get to know what your partners, what internal stakeholders' strengths, weaknesses, motivations are, and really listen to all of that and then build a partnership strategy. And I think that's going to be what all strategies are going to become at the company level. It'll be interesting to see who are the future leaders. Do partnership leaders become more of this chief business officer or become more CEO driven or go-to-market driven? Because they have that mindset and have been having to do that and could not be siloed. You're not successful if you're siloed as a partner leader.
All right, we're back at last. Welcome to the Nearbound podcast. Thank you so much, everyone who's come out and supported Nearbound, the book. So Nearbound and the Rise of the Who Economy. Got my copy right here for the dozens of you that watch on YouTube. I know we have a much bigger following on the podcast networks. Wow, what an incredible reception. We hit #1 bestseller status across systems and planning, marketing, a bunch of different categories. So not just top new release, but #1 selling in all categories on Amazon. And then the best category was all business books. We were second only to Elon Musk. So in high places, and none of this would have been possible without y'all. So just want to give that quick plug. Thank you for the folks, the thousands of you that have gone out and bought it so far, and then obviously thousands more that have downloaded it on Kindle. Got a couple surprises coming. Hardback should be released by the time that this episode's out, in addition to the audiobook, which I actually read and was far more difficult than I thought it would be. So audiobook will be out there, and it's read by the author, me. So I hope you folks enjoy it. And now we're going to kick off another episode of the Nearbound podcast, which I have Lizzie Chapman here, who is the VP of Tech Partnerships and Channels for AdRoll and Rollworks. Lizzie, how you doing?
I'm good. Congratulations on all the book success. Hopefully you can knock Elon off the top there as soon as possible.
No, that's definitely not happening. We got close to the launch, but there's no way you're going to maintain that velocity and overtake I think that's the biggest business biography now. I believe it's overtaken
Ever?
Steve Jobs. Yeah. So Steve
wow.
Jobs was the biggest, but the same author, I believe, Walter Isaacson.
Yeah.
So yeah, not dethroning Elon Musk. He's kind of top of the world right now, whether you love him or hate him. He's
there.
He's there. So,
yeah.
Well, amazing, Lizzie. Thanks so much for hopping on with us. We've had a number of conversations over the years, and obviously you have been at the intersect of all things marketing and MarTech and advertising, which are experiencing some incredible changes right now, given changes to third-party cookies. I saw. I won't mention the company because I won't give them the time of day because I got you here. But one of your competitors mentioning how, here's what we're doing about third-party cookies, and there's all this stuff happening everywhere. It's an interesting time and space to kind of be in MarTech. And we wanted to talk a little bit about that, plus really what you're doing with RevOps Venture right now in collaborative GTM. And might there be some overlap?
Synergies?
Yeah, yes. Synergies, if you will, with Nearbound. So why don't we kick off maybe there, Lizzie? Collaborative GTM. Like you've started to utilize this for RevOps Venture, your new side project. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so me and a former coworker who came more from the revenue operations side of the world, we're chatting one day and we're like, it's got to be different. Like go-to-market has to be different. This is not a new concept to any of your listeners. And so we thought about what can we do and how can we collaborate ourselves to help people think about a new strategy and how we go to market. So kind of our thesis is that the days of silos is over. You hear it everywhere. You're going to need efficient growth. You're going to have to become creative in that. That's why things like partner-led growth, ecosystem-led growth, Nearbound are all gaining traction. And so our real thought there is you no longer can have one led growth motion. You have to have all of them, and they have to work together. There has to be a cohesive strategy where you have product sales, marketing, partnerships coming together into saying, this is how we're going to market, and this is how we're going to collaborate cross-functionally to do that. And there's a mindset and a leadership style that is needed and needs to evolve further, and current leaders need to evolve further to do so. So we've been tackling that kind of through 3 different lenses. One is we have our own podcast that hopefully you and your team will come on one day that really focuses on the tools that are helping go-to-market leaders solve their problems. So whether that be an operations tool, a sales tool, a partner tool to actually help with the infrastructure. We have a newsletter really focused on metrics, KPIs, measurable outputs that Dimitri, my co-founder, runs because he's the numbers and data's guy called Revenue Roundup. And then we have my newsletter called The Ships that really focuses on the mindset behind leadership, relationships, and partnerships. And we really think those three things together are what you need to start evolving and doing this new form of go-to-market.
Well, I definitely have structured the entirety of the book that way, and it's funny for the video folks. I have the last chapter is called the Nearbound Mindset, which kind of brings together what I call an overlay, how to put this across each department. I think your take on it is actually a little bit more interesting in some ways because you're expanding across, I think, a much wider remit whenever you're talking about, let's say, the intersect of, let's say, product-led growth and, let's say, Nearbound or partner-led growth. And you can layer these motions on top of each other. And I was actually at an event a couple of weeks ago with Sangram with GTM Partners and co-founder of Terminus, which it's kind of funny. I remember my first call with Sangram, and I was like, "Hey, your book Move. You've been kind of a leader in this space. You talk nothing about partnerships, nothing at all." He mentions, he has all these led growth, like even had event-led growth, and which I love events. I do those stuff all the time. But where's partnerships? And I remember that on that call, I was like, "Mark my words, you're going to be talking about partnerships as one of the primary levers for growth within the next 6 months." And he's like, "Okay." Well, sure enough, at the event, one of the 6, led growths he had was partner-led growth. Yeah. So I think the mainstream is really starting to come around to this. The innovators and, folks that traditionally don't have a partnerships background are talking about it, like a Sangram, for example, that, was a kind of a luminary of the ABM space, so to speak, Flip My Funnel, et cetera. Obviously, he's doing kind of the consulting analyst side of things now with GTM Partners. Why do you think that approach of, let's say, putting partner alongside product or putting partner alongside, sales, or what other types of led growth are we talking about? And how do you make those things talk together?
Yeah. So I think like a lot of people pay lip service to partner-led growth. Like we have a partnerships team, and I know you talk a lot about this too, and we're focusing on, we're doing it. And it's like partnerships does not work unless every other team is also focused on partnerships. Product-led growth does not work unless everyone believes in the product and is marketing it correctly and doing it well. Sales-led growth doesn't work unless you have a good product, a good partnerships, good marketing. And so what we're really focused on is trying to tie those pieces together and giving the metrics that you should focus on, the mindset you should focus on. But ultimately, that strategy, there's no methodology. Like there are methodologies you can use and do, but there's not what that looks like at AdRoll versus RollWorks is different. There's different teams, it's a different product. And so there's going to have to be a unique strategy for that. And so what kind of guidance can we give and tools can we surface and ideas can we bring up that help a company bring their own strategy to the mix and do something on their own? So that's really been my approach as a leader. I think like to be good at partnerships, you have to get to know what your partners, what internal stakeholders, strengths, weaknesses, motivations are, and really listen to all of that and then build a partnership strategy. And I think that's going to be what all strategies are going to become at the company level. It'll be interesting to see who are the future leaders. Do partnership leaders become more of this chief business officer or become more CEO driven or go-to-market driven? Because they have that mindset and have been having to do that and could not be siloed. You're not successful if you're siloed as a partner leader.
Right. And I was actually taking some notes because you made me think about a couple different things as you were talking, Lizzie. And for the folks listening, I do not have Isaac here today. He got concussed. So he got whacked by his kid in the back of the head jumping out of the pool. So he was in the ER today. All is fine. CAT scan came back okay, outside of him being a complete curmudgeon and smoking a tobacco pipe and reading literature and philosophy and all of that. But
It
I'll
would have
throw.
been an interesting conversation had he been here. Yeah.
You would have been even more cranky.
Yeah.
But what I was thinking about is there's kind of two follow-ons to that, Lizzie. One is thinking about the different, let's say, mission critical things that are important to, let's say, product led growth versus sales led growth. And then after that, I might want to talk a little bit about a framework. Have you heard of Brian Balfour, the former VP of
Yes.
growth? So like the 4 FITs model: market, product, channel, model. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll use that as a backstop, but let's start with product led growth. What's most important in product led growth?
Uh,
To me, it would be time to value, right? So Brian talks about that a lot, right? He talks about that a lot. And, hey, if you're product led growth, like your time to value better be fast. So free entry point, but then some value that's up front, right? Time to value, it better be quick. You can't really have a salesperson involved. And I need to know that aha moment. And his most
yeah.
famous example, obviously at HubSpot, was Sidekick. The time to value was when that email, you installed the Chrome extension, they'd send you an email and then you'd open it and then you'd get a read receipt, right? So the time to value of understanding what the product did was very quick. But then in sales led growth, it's almost like the opposite. Like you almost probably don't even want to have pricing on the website, right? Like,
Yep.
so I think packaging, for example, model, I think in his 4 FITs framework, the model is very, very different. Talk to me a little bit about that, how you see those things conflating or like being at odds with each other. Like you can't have product led growth and sales led growth. It seems difficult, like time to value, packaging. I mean, and then partner, what would be that thing for partner?
Yeah. So I think I would argue you could have both, right? So you can have an entry level product and then a product that is more challenging to use and you need sales to help with that. And so can it be like a level of product and
So
maybe
multi-product then,
yeah, you could
multi-SKU.
yeah, so that could be one approach to it. I think typically companies are going to start with one or the other, right? They're going to start at the enterprise level and work their way down, or you're going to start at that kind of SMB level and work their way up. I think a lot of the SaaS companies that are out there today outside of AI are in a place where they probably have both. I know for AdRoll and RollWorks, we do. We have multi-tiered products and we add value on top of it. And so we have a product-led growth strategy and we have a sales-led growth strategy. How do where is the change off there? When do we pass things off? How do they work together? How do we bring quicker time to value in the sales product and then also bring sales expertise into some of the smaller accounts that we have, or at least help them grow into that larger customer that we're targeting there. I think regardless, like you probably want a bit of both at some point. Like you're probably going to want some salespeople at some point. Doesn't necessarily mean that you need to start there. And if your product is so complicated to use that it requires sales and all of this outside support, with AI and the influence there, I don't think that's always going to last, right? So we're in this evolution of like where the market sits as well, that those things are somewhat colliding. And then on the partnership side of it, they help in both those scenarios. And I'll keep talking about AdRoll and RollWorks specifically, but on to get time to value, it's really helpful to have integrations that pull in your data quickly and create that time to value. And then on the sales side, getting referrals, the co-marketing and inbound leads that you can get from that. We're going a little bit into marketing-led growth there. And what you talk about all the time is valuable there. So the partnerships definitely help on both sides of those. But I think you're seeing a convergence of the sales and product bumping up against each other in the SaaS space.
So what you just said was very interesting to me because that was kind of like I would have different buckets for product led growth and sales led growth or marketing led growth, or we could use some of Sangram's how he talks about them, event led growth, whatever. It almost feels like to me partner led growth is an overlay to the other things. It is a perfect example. Let's say for example time to value.
Yeah.
And I talk a lot about Orange just because it's the ecosystem that I'm the most familiar with, HubSpot. I've been there since before they launched a platform and still partnering with them, heavily today. And one of the things that I saw and I've replicated several times is powered by partnerships. So like the time to value, for instance, for HubSpot CRM is what? Well, oftentimes you have an empty box.
Yeah.
ZoomInfo's CEO, Henry Schuck, I think it's some of the best marketing for ZoomInfo is not their product marketing, but when Henry actually talks, he says, I don't sell an empty box. So they're trying to build an operating system, a CRM, if you will, for sales and marketing. And whenever you go and buy something like CRM, it is an empty box. There's nothing in it.
That you have to fill. Yes.
You have to fill, right? And one of the things that HubSpot did for increasing time to value is they did a powered by partnership with Clearbit, right? So like if you got a lead that came in from a form and all you got was the email or from chat, Clearbit would turn that into firmographics and demographics, right? So they kind of spit it all out. And obviously HubSpot acquired Clearbit as a data provider. To me, that's both, right? That's product-led growth, right? HubSpot freemium's trial experience powered by partnership with Clearbit. It does both. It checks off both boxes.
Yeah. I have a question for you is around like, I think HubSpot is trying to have more of sales-led growth and utilizing their partners in that and selling larger subscription services, right? And so how does that interact for you with product-led growth? Because I see a lot of overlap in terms of laddering those customers up, but you would put them in separate boxes or
Well,
buckets.
the story that I like to talk about is the kind of like chat and like maybe HipChat as a predecessor to Slack and then Microsoft Teams. And a lot of folks that are channel and Microsoft fans, which they deserve to be, it's the most valuable company in the world, will point out how Teams decimated Slack and Slack had to get acquired. Well, no one should scoff at a $25 billion exit, right? Like that's congrats, you won big time. What Slack did to me was Slack is always a PLG company, right? Like it was product-led growth. And you'd get these little pockets of, someone at IBM or whatever, name your logo, that were using it in some offshoot of a team. And that was happening organically. Then you'd roll up that usage and that data to then run an enterprise sales play. That's, I'd say, probably most popularized by probably David Sachs from Yammer, which is kind of funny. It's tangential to Slack and productivity, right?
Yep.
That was Yammer's, sales process. And my sales mentor, Matt Cameron, was a VP of sales at Yammer. So I learned a lot about this from him. So to me, I don't know if I necessarily call it sales-led growth, though. I think that's what HipChat lacked, was the sales layer on top of it that was much more mature and go-to-market and kind of focused. That was an afterthought to them in a lot of ways because they're such a product-oriented company, Atlassian. Whereas I think Slack really nailed layering sales on top of product. But to say it would be sales-led almost is like the inverse, right? Sales led to me puts accounts first, right? I don't know that Slack, at least in its meteoric rise, when they were doing amazing ARR from sales, I'm not sure that they really were doing targeted sales approach. They were selling into the accounts that had a handful of users or pockets and then trying to roll that up into one EULA.
Yeah. And I think when you look at the companies that have done it best, they might not have to. If you're looking at companies that are kind of sitting in the middle of the road, you have to acquire the right product-led growth companies to expand them, and whether we call that sales-led growth or not. And you're probably going to have to supplement some of that growth of existing customers with outbound, inbound, nearbound sales approaches, right? And so your product strategy in general needs to fit both of those buckets, and then how you're thinking about who you're acquiring for your ICP has to overlap too. So maybe they are in separate buckets in terms of exactly what they're doing, but the basis of the strategy has to be considering both those pieces. Maybe that's a better way for me to phrase it.
It's a forward. Right. Yeah. So the way that I would think about it is because people are trying to use these frameworks like, ecosystem led growth. And it's like, okay, but that's might not be the tip of the spear for the company. It might be the product, and ecosystem might not be leading, but it is the thing that's going to make you a great company, right? Like, and that's why I've always been skeptical to use the led growth framework for conversations around partner, because folks think that it might replace hey, we went all in on time to value in our freemium product SKUs. You want to put a partner in front of that? Screw you. The resistance is high. Just the same way, except language matters. Language has a network effect. And anytime I would bring up, let's use another phrase, co-sell. I get it. We're all trying to figure out co-sell. I have strong opinions on that because I spend the majority of my time when I'm not, talking to the Nearbound podcast and the network, talking to CROs and CEOs. So people that are trying to hit 100 million in sales this quarter, $1 billion in sales next quarter. And if they don't have a mature collaboration process with partners today, when I say co-sell, almost invariably, here's what I get. I don't want to stack another opportunity on top of one of my open opportunities.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Why?
Yeah.
Because I'm fighting for budget right now. If I have a 150K deal and I have a partner that maybe they're even smaller, it's a 75K deal. Well, now I'm selling a 225K deal and I know I'm going to have to discount. So like that process is like, look, no, I'm not saying co-sell is in two open opties. You can get intel or influence or intros and like work around the
They
account
don't understand it. Yeah.
right. Cause co-sell kind of implies, well, two companies selling.
Yeah.
Right. Well, what if it's an existing customer? I don't know that that's necessarily a co-sell. So I think the language that we use as partner, and ecosystem, professionals is very important to meet people where they are in these other departments. And if I'm talking to a head of growth that's like, hey, we're really, focused on growing through, let's say events, right? Bringing a ton of people together to experience a new product launch that's free and then it's product led and there's time to value. And then I come in there and I start talking about partner led growth or ecosystem led growth and then co-sell. That head of growth that like might be Brian Balfour like, right? This is that smart is going to go, you're talking about undermining the entire company strategy right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you're right. Language is very important because co-sell, the question I often get is like, how many referrals are we going to get? And I'm like, no. Like, that's not the only thing that's going to happen in this, which is where I thought you were going. I think the main thing we're really anchoring on is like, the silos are over. So whether you're using a two-pronged growth strategy, a one-pronged growth strategy, you can't just say, we're going to focus exclusively on time to value in the product, or we're just going to throw salespeople at this and figure out how to do it because that cash is gone. Like there has to be a multifaceted strategy, and it might not cover all of the led growth strategies that are available out there. And you have to be thinking about that before you get to we're just focused on time to value. Like there has to be a core center that you're like, this is our strategy, and here's how we execute it through whatever led growth strategies we want to, and how they work together, how they feed into each other, how they represent each other in our core strategy.
100%.
Yeah.
I think I really don't love this analogy, but it oftentimes comes up, and we'll try to take any political commentary out of it because I think sports analogies fail often in business because there's like one game and there's like one thing that you're playing.
Yep.
And I think war is actually a more interesting one. And I'll unpack that a little bit without like getting political. In war, you have like what? A Navy, like an Army, an Air Force, right? There's this multifaceted approach. Well, if you're Switzerland and you're landlocked, you probably don't have a very good Navy game, right? Like
Yep.
you don't have battalions of warships to kind of like, do that. So your strategy is very different than someone that's exposed, entirely as an island state, let's say like Australia, right? Like the Australian Navy is world class. In fact, we partner with the Australian Navy pretty frequently, just because they are surrounded 360 degrees by ocean, right? Multiple oceans. And I think that's what we need to think about is what is your tip of the spear and your strong starting point? Like maybe you are more ground force based, right? So you're out, you're sales led and you have a high ACV product because of X, Y, or Z. That doesn't mean that you can't supplement with like the Navy. It doesn't mean you can't supplement with the Air Force or Space Force or wherever the heck all of this stuff is going in AI. But I think that's like kind of what we're saying is that these things need to be thought of as a more comprehensive strategy. It's like, yes, you're the Army Commander General of the sales department, or you are the Navy Commander General of the, marketing department. What about these other levers, right? Or battalions and methods for, working the map of the territory, so to speak. And you can't do it alone. Like those countries stay small for a reason, or they don't stay around for very long.
Yeah, that is a very good analogy. I just watched Band of Brothers this weekend, so it's top
Okay,
of
so it
mind.
landed on you. Good.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm not a war history buff, really. It's just I'm like, is one that's come to me a couple times. So
Yeah, no, I think it is a good analogy, and sports doesn't do it justice sometimes in terms of what we do in business. But I think you nailed it with that. It's like we really need to be thinking about it in terms of, and this is going back to what I said about partnerships, like what are our strengths and weaknesses? What is this team's strengths and weaknesses? And how do we supplement those? And how do we fill those gaps? And partnerships people are really good at it. That's how you think about a partnership. What's going to strengthen our platform? What's going to strengthen our go-to-market strategy, our marketing strategy? What's going to strengthen the leads that we're getting in? Like, we are consistently thinking about it in that pronged approach. And I think businesses are going to have to think about that more holistically, not just as it relates to partnerships.
Well, I'm going to tie what you said just now back to something you said earlier about mindset. Like, what are we good at? So, like the folks listening to this podcast today, the mindset that you're going to have in that multifaceted pronged approach, the choices that you make matter. That's called strategy. Strategy is choice, period. Right? That is strategy, is making a choice. Oftentimes, partner folks get a bit bogged down in the infinite amount of choices, right? So there's like a lack of decision making because there's so much partner opportunity everywhere. And I think one of the forcing functions should be, okay, what are your strengths? Well, no one was born in partnerships. We're kind of the melting pot of SaaS, right?
Yep.
Using another nation state analogy, we're the America of SaaS. No one was born here. We all found ourselves here from other departments: sales, marketing, customer success, product, whatever those things are. And it would seem to me, Lizzie, that like that's the strength that you should lean into, right? So if you're a product-led growth company and you came over from the product management side, like lean into creative ways to launch new SKUs using powered by partnerships. If you were a sales account executive that crushed it and you're like, hey, partners, like they always help me, I want to get into this thing. Well, then you should probably lean into the sales component and figuring that out versus trying to unpack the entirety of the multifaceted approach. Well, talk to me a little bit about that. Like, how are we not doing that? I more often than not see folks that I'm like, well, wait a second, where did you come from before partnerships? And it's someone from customer success trying to figure out co-sell. And I'm like, no wonder you're having a hard time with your CRO. Like, you've never sat in a forecast meeting.
Yeah. So I would say yes and to what you just said. So absolutely, if you're like just entering into a partnerships role, lean into what you were doing before, because that's what's going to make the most sense. I think good partnership leaders. Have you read I'm probably going to mess up his name, Charles Duhigg's Super Communicators book? He did The Power of Habits too. I just listened on the podcast. I cheated. I didn't read the book. But this is like what I think good leaders in general, good partnership leaders are good at. And to be a super communicator, and this can be a learned skill, you're really good at listening. You listen a lot. And so I think once you get into a partnerships role, you kind of gain your footing, leaning into the thing you were doing before. What I would encourage people to do is go and sit down in those meetings. Go and talk to people. Go in the places where you don't already know what's happening. Like, go and sit in that forecast meeting. Go sit in product meetings. Have one-on-ones with those people and learn what are their strengths and weaknesses. What are our strengths and weaknesses as a company in those areas? And through doing that, you can figure out how could partnerships actually start to solve problems here. Talk to your partners. Like, they have done a lot of this stuff already, and you can gain knowledge from them. You can learn about like, what are their customers struggling with? Can we fill a gap there? Right. And so I think initially, yes, lean into the thing you're good at, but start to expand that, right? And figure out how you expand that.
Yeah, that's why it's the role that has the most potential for growth. And in my opinion, the best partner leader, I mean, it's not in my opinion, my lived experience, whatever, to steal a trite phrase, is the best people that I know, the actual partner leaders that fundamentally change the trajectory of their company, they're all CEOs.
Yeah.
Almost all of them. I mean, or they end up being VCs, right? So they're playing the game at the top of the pile, from, Bobby Napoltoni on the Salesforce side, to Pete Caputo on the HubSpot side, to someone like a Christina Cordova from the, let's say Stripe, and then Notion, and then First Round Capital, or Laura Padilla, Zoom, building that ecosystem from like a handful of employees to like 500 in just like 2 years.
Yeah.
Like now she's on the venture side as well, Sapphire. So like those people, to me, I always see as having illustrious careers, and they become fantastic leaders because they're great communicators and they understand all parts of the business. So what I want to do now, though, is I want to take us in a different direction. We opened up talking a little bit about, your background in the MarTech and then ad tech space. And in some of the prep, you were talking about a very interesting concept. There's, I don't think I have anything on my desk that would be a good prop for the video listeners. Okay, like maybe a screwdriver. How about this? There are standards that people have. So like Phillips, right? Or let's say Torx, or manufacturing that brings together industry so that way the entire market can grow to go like, hey, whenever you say X is X, that's what this means. And in ad tech, there were some standards that were developed, but in integrations, it's like the Wild West. So that was something I wanted to unpack. There are standards in the ad tech industry. Let's kind of start there. And what's missing from the integration industry?
It's great that there's standards in the ad tech industry. So I came up in the ad tech industry like in the wild days of AdMeld before Google acquired them, and that became their SSP. And there were no standards back then, and everyone was figuring out programmatic advertising. And you did custom integrations every single time a demand side platform and a supply side platform integrated with one another. And then
I'm going to pause you real quick just there for the folks that might be on the sell side, et cetera. So the demand side, supply side, and SSP, just give us a quick 1-2 on those.
Yeah, demand side platform is basically a buying platform for programmatic buyers. So the Trade Desk, AdRoll, uh, Criteo, Google. Oh, I don't even know the Google name anymore. I was going to say AdX, but I think it's evolved now. But anywhere that buyers are going in and setting up ad campaigns to buy programmatically. And then the supply side platforms aggregate all of the publishers. So some of the big names there are OpenX. They've kind of consolidated a little bit. What is Rubicon's new name? Magnite is another one that
Yeah, Rubicon Project. Frank Dante. I learned a
yes.
lot from Frank. I learned a ton from Frank. He was one of the first entrepreneurs I saw give a talk, and I was like, this guy's brilliant.
Yes, yeah, and there's video supply side platforms, and so for people who maybe don't understand programmatic, it works very much like the stock exchange, right? So there's bidding, and you win those bids, and then the impression serves on the publisher, and the demand side platform and the supply side platform are the two platforms that hold that auction in the middle. And there's many players on both sides of that.
So
And
it's a true market, right? There's a true market with, I'd say, let's say free market oriented kind of like supply demand, but then there's also some standardization that allows for more throughput. And I'm assuming that's where you're going.
yes, exactly. So the IAB, which is the Interactive Advertising Bureau, very formal name, is a governing body that came in and said, I think we can help standardize everything that's happening in the wild, wild west of programmatic maybe 10, 12 years ago. And they said, let's set up what's called open RTB standards. And so what that allowed was for to have a standardized way for these demand side platforms and these supply side platforms to integrate. And how you put an impression in the marketplace became very specific, and how you bid on that impression became very specific as well. Now that covered like many of the use cases back then. They have now, I don't know, on version 15 of OpenRTB, because things evolve, the market changes, and they update to ensure that's part of the standards. And then there's always like custom objects or fields that if you want to do something that is strategic and differentiated with a certain partner that you're working with, you can go and do that. So this is my background. This is what I've been doing. And then while I was at AdRoll, they were like, you know how to do partnerships. You can do all these MarTech partnerships. And I was like, this is different, but I will figure it out. And so I started to get into that. And we were doing an integration with Shopify. And we built it and it went well. And then we went to do our integration with WooCommerce. And I was like, this is completely different. A lot of the things we built are not something we can reutilize. Maybe on our internal systems we can reutilize a little bit, but like we're building a whole new integration, and then we have to go and do that with many other providers. And there are some things that are like so ubiquitous in MarTech and MarTech partnerships that I'm like, why isn't this standardized? Like passing it contacts and events or whatever you want to call that, it's a lot of what integrations do. And so why isn't there like a governing body trying to come in and help us do this? I think iPaaS solutions have been our best shot at this. But OpenRTB doesn't charge you anything. Like that is just there for everyone to utilize for free.
So where my head goes from a first principle standpoint, and for longtime listeners of the show, like that's where we typically, I like to geek out. I like to dig down to like, what's the underlying kind of thing underneath this? To me, the unit in advertising, right, and the exchange of that unit is seems and does seem standardized in that there is a placement, there is a buyer, there is a seller, there's a price, there's an auction, so to
Yep.
speak. Typically, whenever it comes to an integration, you mentioned, let's say exchange of data, right? And there's a couple different types of APIs and ways to pass data, like a contact or an event. So we're talking about, let's say, a REST-based API
Yep.
or a SOAP-based API. So like a stream versus a batch. And then there's obviously there's much better ways to do this, like REST versus SOAP. Like, don't ever make me build a SOAP integration again, Oracle, right? Like, PandaDoc, and it's like, why does it take 2 minutes to load a document, right? This is this batch process. I'm curious though, if you start to think about like a lot of these companies' different architectures and the various different ways that you do that. Like if you go to a dev portal, right, like a platform, and you'll have, let's say example scripts or, calls or whatever, and it'll be written in, it's like, here's a Python one, here's a Perl one, here's these different ones. What do you think standardizes that underneath? Like, what's the thing that's missing? Because there are so many various permutations of like how that data could be delivered, the type of data, and then even the programming language.
Yeah, the field name of that data. We might be too late. Like, that is something I often consider, right? Like, all of this has been created, although, we, in my ad tech days, had built many custom integrations and did not want to switch to OpenRTB. And we were eventually somewhat forced to, right? If you want to play, you end up switching over, and the IAB did a good job of incentivizing companies to switch over to this. But there's plenty of, I think, like custom fields to do this in. OpenRTB is written or was written in JSON. I might be dating myself a little bit, but you can standardize the language to some degree as well, and at least have something that covers off on 50% of the use cases of the majority of integrations. It's never going to cover everything, but could cover some of the use cases. Now, maybe, and I don't know enough about AI, but maybe that solves it, right? Like, does that start to come in and start to just say, okay, we're going to write these things and this is what it looks like? I think right now, like the best bet for any of us doing integrations and wanting to speed those up, either you're a big company that says build to me, and that's how we're going to do this, or you go and use an iPaaS solution, and they help support the majority of use cases. Now, as working for media companies, doesn't often solve the use cases for media companies, solves the use case for the SaaS components of our product, but not necessarily some of the other things that we'd want to use with even an iPaaS solution. And maybe that would be the case in the specs, but I think there are ways to standardize some of what we're doing. Say you write it in this language. This is the best of the languages out there, and you utilize these types of fields, and this is how we're going to move forward and try to get some. You would just need one big company to be on board with it, or one big app marketplace to be on board with it, and you'd at least start to get that in either the B2B or B2C space.
I have a couple follow-on thoughts to that you've kind of prompted out of me. Is one would be on the open RTB. There is some value in that network effect. Like, what do you get out of the network effect of open RTB? Like, by folks following this standard, is it technically a network, or is it a standard of across multiple networks? Like, unpack that for the listeners that aren't aware of kind of like the media landscape.
Yeah, it's that's like kind of both. But it is, because companies have taken different approaches with it. It's a standardization across multiple networks. It gets interesting with a company like BidSwitch that was acquired by Criteo, because they basically took this concept and made it a network of standardization as well. BidSwitch is like the iPaaS of
there's
ad
benefits
tech.
because there's a network components to it, right? Like, there's more participants, so the overall value goes up for all participants, right? There's a benefit of network effects, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So to me in SaaS, I'm not certain what that network effect benefit is to all parties. Like, yeah, building a new integration as a head of ISV partnerships, I certainly would have loved to do that the handful of times that my team's like, hey, if we have this integration, I can close this deal. I'm like, fantastic, go talk to the product team. Like, they're already mad at me, right? Like, there's no way that's going to happen. So I'm not certain what the network effect thing is. But I have a hypothesis to kind of two I'd love your take on.
Yeah. Go
Go
ahead. No, I was going to say, like, I if like all of the CRMs had some standardization, that would be really helpful to the companies around them trying to make them better. Totally understand their competitors. So are all the DSPs and the SSPs. And so there is I think an interesting way to make this happen. But please continue on your thought.
One would be, I'm not sure that this is an industry phrase, but I've used it in conversations when I've been building partnerships with like y'all or any of the other kind of like companies that have data as their primary let's say differentiator, is exhaust. So I did this, I'll give you an example that I did at Drift. One of the things that we were trying to do was like, okay, how do we make this valuable for both parties? Is that we were ingesting data from data providers to provide a better chat experience, right?
Yeah.
But what I would do is, they'd say, hey, this visitor is from this company, or this contact, they work at this company, or here's their title, or what have you. And then later on in the chat, if that person put in their email and it didn't match, the exhaust on that, I'm perfectly capable of taking that and going back and saying, hey, that was the wrong match, right? So there's some exhaust that can come off of the exchange of information. And I'm kind of curious, like, based on these integrations, if you were to network effect kind of the scale of these integrations, what could be the exhaust kind of at scale that generates network effects for all? So like, hey, if you follow this standard, here's what you get that you otherwise would not get. And I've heard of, some collectives or like, some organizations that have tried to kind of spring off here and there. They're almost non-profit-y, almost like
Yep.
buyers groups, but like there's got to be something like that, I think, for a concept like this to work. I'd love your thoughts.
Yeah. To answer your second question first, yes, absolutely. This has to be like a nonprofit led initiative that you have people at for-profit companies that are part of, right? They are informing what's happening. They're bought into it. They're evangelizing it within their own company. So that's a key piece to making something like this work. In terms of exhaust, I don't know if I completely understand your question, but my thought there is like it should eliminate exhausts in some cases, right? So if you start to standardize the format, you're potentially not getting bad data in there, but you still could be getting bad data by nature of just passing that data integration. Could the standardization help out with that, right? Like that's going to be specific to each platform, but let me know if I answer that in the
Yeah,
way that you're
actually,
thinking about it.
I'll tie those two things together. Let's say there's some, contact thing or whatever. There's a network of integrations and someone misspelled their name. And it's like, well, there's 14 other records that say it's this, yours is the one that says it's this, right? Like you could
I get where you're
normalize.
getting at. Yes, you could actually start to do that as well, and that'd be interesting. I don't. My opinion is, I'd almost want a third party company coming in and doing that because then you're starting to actually build like something that is worth value outside of the. You're starting to go into the data and change what is in there versus just being like the pipes of it. And so, do you have a third party company that's coming in and actually helping to do that? That would be up for debate for this future governing body to decide of like, do we manage that or do others? The IAB has done many other things beyond just the open RGB and has gotten into some of that more like policing and policy of like what data is getting passed and how do we pass that. But that's for that future governing body to decide, I
which
suppose.
which will come in the form of a hot take for me, which it will happen on the blockchain. So,
Yes.
so like I think that's actually probably what will happen, is that there will be governing bodies, right? We know what they are. We've seen them in the past. They just haven't really had the enterprise grade application or scale. But it would seem to me that like those things are supposedly or hopefully coming in the blockchain. And kind of my parting thoughts on that would be the rise of AI is going to create a mass centralization, but you still have the disparity of data. And then folks are going to go, well, actually, I want a little bit of control. And then I think we'll see blockchain as a response to the massive proliferation of AI. Blockchain couldn't happen before AI. It's probably the only defense against AI taking over all of the data. And then that'll probably standardize, right, a lot of the things that you're talking about. So it's like we've been growing up in the tech world with blockchain, AI, like all of these things. Like it's probably coming pretty quick.
Yeah, blockchain actually years ago, and when I was part of IAB groups, was such a big topic. And we're like, how does blockchain get into the programmatic bit stream, and how do we use it here? And it never took off. So I think you know more about this than I do, but I think you're right. Like it's going to come back and help police a lot of those things, and so we don't even have to worry about how do we start policing and policy, making sure that data is accurate.
Well, there are governing bodies for, tokens and things like that, right?
Yes.
Basically governance structures that are baked into like how data is shared, et cetera. So like folks are thinking about it. So I think you're more clairvoyant on that point that like, hey, open RTB, there was something for the advertising industry, integrations like, soon enough, someday, this will be like, hey, this was said here, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, wherever it is, where those standards are in place and people are interoperating according to some sort of standard where there is a network effect from, let's say, that normalization and standardization. And that, I think, is where we're going to close this out, because that's the power of network effects and the power of partnerships, collaborative GTM growth, all of it, in the times that we find ourselves in. So Lizzie, thank you so much for joining us on the Nearbound podcast.
Yeah, thank you. I can't wait for us to standardize that stuff so we can focus on the more strategic parts of partnerships.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, Nearbound, we'll see you around next time on the Nearbound podcast.